Namaste and welcome, Douglas, for joining Ahimsa Conversations. It's a true privilege uh, to have you
My
on this
privilege. Thank
platform.
you.
Yeah. So, like with a lot of guests, it's good to know what might have been your very earliest experience or thought about nonviolence, maybe even back to your childhood.
Yes, and you slipped me the word that that question was going to be asked, so I appreciate the heads up. And I was reflecting, and then it occurred to me, yes, from childhood. There was an incident on the school playground when I was about 10 years old, where a kid who was sort of a bully came up and started saying some nasty things, and then he was physically punching me repeatedly. And I asked him to stop, and that had no effect. And I realized, in retrospect, that I'd been socialized nicely by my parents and other people that fighting is not correct. You should not fight. And so I was in a bit of a dilemma. So what do I do? It hurts. He's punching me, and I don't want him to punch me. But on the same time, I'm not supposed to fight back. And so somehow I got this idea. I bent my knees and got low down, wrapped my arms around him in a big hug, and then stood up again. And that left him with his feet dangling, being embraced. And that I was just a little bit taller than him, which helped. But he just kept trying to punch ineffectively to my arms and so forth and screaming, "Put me down, put me down, put me down." And I kept saying to him, "Will you stop punching me if I put you down? Will you stop hitting me? Put me down, put me down." And this went on a little bit. And finally, somehow, what I was saying penetrated
Yeah.
into him. And he said, "Yes." So I put him down and off he went.
Yeah.
And I looked around in great fear that a teacher on the playground would have seen all of this and somehow I'd be accused of being embroiled in a fight. But no, the teacher fortunately was looking the other direction or what have you. So, I mean, that sort of tells me different things as I reflect. Now I'm 72 years old. That was a long time ago. But
Yeah.
I think some of it is sort of my natural inclination to behave nonviolently. And in my experience as an anthropologist, I think many people, probably most people,
Mm.
most of the time, have this inclination to behave
Yeah.
nonviolently. And
Yeah.
part of the problem that we face as a group, we can get back into this in later on in the talk, but
Yeah.
that there are a few bullies out there, and then they're a big problem for all the rest of us. But that was
Absolutely.
an important lesson for me to realize that I could draw that middle line of not being pushed by the bully,
Mm.
but also, not capitulating is what I'm saying. But
Right, right.
here's a strategy where I didn't have to engage in fighting either,
Yeah.
and I could do that middle line. So I
No,
would say that's my first key learning experience about nonviolence right there in the school play yard.
and that's a very extremely helpful story because a lot of people who find it difficult to take nonviolence seriously believe uh, whatever mistakenly that nonviolence means that you just have to sit back and let someone beat you, and so that's really very, very lovely. Thank you so much for that. Um, so when Gandhi said that nonviolence is as old as the hills, a lot of people said he didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't understand history. Huh? And that is because in that time, let's say the first half of the 20th century, right? Because in 48, Gandhi is gone. Um, there was a dominant theory. You will correct me if it's from more than anthropology, which was the idea that we were descendants of the killer ape. And I know from my very, very minor research that that theory has been very substantially questioned over the last 70, 80 years. So, since this is really going to be watched by a lot of people who don't know this field, could you just briefly explain what the killer ape theory was and where that stands today in the realm of scholarship? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We're going back. It's an interesting history, and I'm just shuffling my papers for a second here. Um, this is one of my books, Human Potential for Peace, In fact, my first sole authored book. And I actually write about this in the book. And what I'm looking for at the moment is a diagram. Well, let me come back to that in a second because the short summary of this complicated situation is that there were these hominin ancestors, or at least somewhere back there in the family bush of humanity, called Australopithecines from South Africa. And a famous anatomist who was working in the South African University at that time, Raymond Dart, um, took a look at these fossils and saw that they were bashed and crumpled and smashed, and some of them had holes, looked like drilled holes in the top of their skulls. And he reached the conclusion that they'd all been murdered, that they were killing each other off. And that's really the origin of this idea of the killer ape. Well, what happened next is interesting because a different professor at the university, whose name happens to be Brain, which is interesting. Um, Brain came along and he knew more about how bones get modified and bent and distorted if they're in the ground for a long time. And we're talking remains that were millions of years old, in the neighborhood of 3 million years old. That's a very long time. And he did an analysis that showed that this was just what you'd expect to see if there was a preserved pile of rubble, bones, with bones in it. But he did something else too about the holes that were in some of the skulls. Um, Dart again had figured this, they were, inflicted by one another. And just give me 1 second and I'll try to find this illustration in the book because, the picture tells how many words, million words. Uh, there was a type of extinct predatory cat back
Okay.
then.
Okay.
Basically had saber teeth.
Uh-huh. Oh.
And Dart managed to find skeletons of this predatory cat and matched the fang marks up and came to a much different conclusion that these were Australopithecines were being preyed upon by the predators, and that's why sometimes you ended up with a pile of bones with two holes which matched. He literally took one of the skeletons, for dramatic effect, and put the cat's saber teeth right in the holes, and they matched right up. And
There
so
you are.
this is also a very good lesson in the sense of Dart conceded that he was wrong and that
Mm.
Brain actually had explanations and data that accounted for the information much more soundly than he had.
Now,
And
what
I'm on
period was this? What time frame are we talking about that this exchange was going on?
1950s.
Okay, thank you.
Dart had written in 1954, I'm almost certain of that publication date, this
Yeah.
incredible phrase about, since the time of Cain and Abel, humans have been bashing each other on the head, and it stems from our long history of predatory instincts, and we were ripping prey apart, and the blood was, it's just like this. Wow. Well, along in the 60s came a playwright turned author. His name was Robert Ardrey, and he wrote a series of very popular selling books back when people bought a lot of paperbacks and read them, and you literally could pick them up in the States, at least in the grocery store counter or a little display of paperbacks.
Mm.
And he publicized this whole killer ape theory, not the brain part of it, just the killer ape part of it. And then movie producer Stanley Kubrick came along a bit later and he did this film. I'm sure many people of your viewers have seen it, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And in that, the opening scene are supposedly our ancestral humans, the so-called killer apes, discovering that they can use bones to smash each other on the head. And so again, this idea that the killer apes being part of our ancestral heritage as humans got a lot of press. So, but yes, your question was, is it debunked? Yes, it's largely debunked, starting with Brain, and then subsequently by generations of anthropologists just sort of
Mm.
accepting that this is an interesting twist in the history and philosophy of science. However, and this is a however, it sort of morphed this
Mm.
killer ape idea
Mm.
because when Jane Goodall and others started studying chimpanzees, they saw some aggression, but they didn't see group on group lethal conflict.
Mm.
And then in the 1970s, Jane Goodall reported to her surprise, that there had been this back and forth killings between two different groups of
Mm-hmm.
chimpanzees.
Mm-hmm.
And this just exploded into, I'm sure you've heard of this one as well.
Yes.
It's pretty much common knowledge now that chimpanzees war with each other and chimpanzees kill each other. And that thing, a la killer ape, has gotten blown way out of proportion if you actually start looking at the data and how this has come out. There's only two sites where chimpanzees have been observed to do this across various chimpanzee studies. So it's not something that all chimpanzees do all the time.
Mm.
And those wars were limited in scope in
Mm.
terms of the timing of it. So, of course, one of the big questions is, why are they doing this? And a very eminent colleague, Richard Wrangham from Harvard University, has written since the 1990s and into the current day various iterations of explaining this along the lines of the killer ape hypothesis.
Oh,
And so there it is. It's been renamed and
yeah.
given a new
Yeah.
flourish. But what Wrangham has done in many of his writings is to then pull in humans as well, especially in his earlier writings,
Mm.
because he sees that there might be a common ancestor to chimpanzees and humans that also killed, and hence going up the evolutionary paths, humanity and chimpanzees, we've started from the same common ancestor that engaged in these wars, and hence it tells us something about our human nature. Now, he may be modifying that to some degree more recently, but he may not also.
Mm.
So, in that sense, unfortunately, in my opinion, this killer ape idea lives on. And I want to really point out to your listeners who would like to hear more about this that my colleague Brian Ferguson
Mm-hmm.
has recently published this book,
Mm.
Chimpanzees, War, and Human Nature. And the
Okay.
subtitle, if you can read it,
Yeah. Are
Are Men
men?
Born to Kill? Yes. R. Brian Ferguson, Oxford University Press. I think it's 23. I can check that detail, but
Uh,
maybe you can find it easily enough there. Yes, from 2023. So it's recent. And one of the first of all, let me talk about the subtitle for a moment, since you asked the question, Are men?
yeah.
Uh, Brian is talking about there's definitely a sex difference here that he and others have pointed out. So really the whole demonic male killer chimp type of idea is talking more about males than females, or generally speaking about males. So that's the subtitle. Um, Brian is an anthropologist from Rutgers University in Newark, just next to New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And he is one of the most meticulous researchers that I would cite. If somebody asked me who does very careful, precise research, Brian would certainly be on that list of colleagues. And he looked at every single case of chimpanzee killing, the infanticide, whatever age, within groups, between groups, and tried to look at this idea that chimpanzees would be evolved or somehow predisposed to killing other group members. And he finds a lot of problems with this whole idea. So
Yeah.
it's a nice thick book,
Yeah.
fasten your seatbelts. It's got a lot of data in it,
Uh,
but it's also very readable.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
if someone really wants to get, cutting edge, right up to the moment type of interpretation, as a real, and I should say, Brian really disagrees with Richard Wrangham in an evidence-based way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's, like they say, the other part of the story.
Wonderful. Of course, the central issue is not whether violence or non-violence have any kind of historicity. Both obviously do. But I think the real dispute is about which is deemed to be more dominant. And we won't, for the moment, go into the motivations of many discourses which, almost make an effort to show that, in India, we have this little twist of English, which we call, we are like that only. Because I think it helps us to kind of maybe process our own embarrassment and guilt about a lot of the behavior that we see around us. Um, but
So
war for
that's an interesting insight. That's an interesting insight you just mentioned. Yeah.
I see this operationally. It's not a research-based insight. It's very anecdotal.
Mhm.
Uh, so, in fact, I would go a step further and say that this response is often because we don't like where we are. So we want some kind of explanation or some external factor that we can blame. And the same is true for war. It's a fairly dominant idea that war is with us for millions of years. And a lot of your work has taken that on and shown it not to be true. So what is the nature of this evidence, which is, which you have so powerfully shown through your writings, that war is actually quite a recent human, shall we call it habit?
Yes, that's a good one. Why not? Let's call it a habit. Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to piggyback on what you just said about the capacities, because humans obviously have a capacity for war and violence. And I argue that they have a larger, more powerful capacity for nonviolence and peace and getting along well with each other, helping each other out, a much more positive view of human nature
Hmm.
than one that just sees us as
Hmm.
well, Hobbesian, for lack of a better term, or a term that's
Hmm.
well known, I should put it that way.
Yeah.
So the types of evidence are actually quite diverse. And in today's science, including with anthropology and of course many other fields, specialization is necessary. You learn a lot about something rather narrow. Where my research is a bit different is, yes, I try to learn a lot about something narrow, but then I try to learn a lot of fields of data, a lot of sub-disciplines on what's going on there. And the reason I do that with a topic of human nature, war, and peace is I think those data to be gleaned from a whole variety of different sources that are relevant to this question. So, for example, archaeology is a very relevant section. If is subdiscipline or area if you're looking to say how old is war.
Hmm.
And as I just mentioned, the killer ape idea and the killer chimps or warring chimps idea pushes warfare way back in the human past as part of human nature. So when I've argued against that, there's two very important archaeological streams of evidence. And one is what is the oldest evidence of war?
Hmm.
And it's not much beyond 10,000 years ago.
Hmm.
So that tells us something right there.
Yeah.
And that's where the debate usually ends. This is also a very interesting historical philosophy of science point of view.
Hmm.
Why are the people that pushing war way backwards? About all they say to there's no evidence for that
Hmm.
is, well, the evidence probably didn't survive. There probably was evidence out there of the war, but we haven't found it yet, or it just didn't make it into the archaeological record. Okay, fair enough, but let's look at the second stream, which I find very convincing. And I'll also note that it's very interesting to me that people taking this long view of warfare, Brian Ferguson says war forever backwards. I really like that term, that
Sorry, warfare?
war forever backwards.
That's very good.
It is good, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So what we do see in the very recent past are multiple origins of warfare. And you can look at different places around the world and you can see the overall pattern. And the patterns are important. The overall pattern is you have a situation where there's nomadic foraging going on, people moving around the landscape, very simple social organization, and you don't see war. And then you get some settling down, first a little bit here and a little bit there. And you may get a little bit more aggression or maybe not in the archaeological record for that location.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you get settlement, population increasing, and warfare comes in at some point when you have a total change of social organization that shifts from very egalitarian small nomadic groups to settled, larger, inegalitarian, unequal types of social organization. And it doesn't always happen, and it happens at different speeds depending on place and happenstance in history. But you can find this, for instance, in the valley of Oaxaca in Mexico, where there's a clear archaeological record.
Mm.
First, there were nomadic hunter-gatherers, no evidence of war for thousands of years.
Mm.
And then you get the first little, we call them chiefdoms,
Mm.
3 locations in this valley. And then archaeologically, you can see where one chiefdom attacked the other one and burned the village.
Mm.
And those people who were routed relocated on the top of this local hilltop, which later became the famous archaeological site of Monte Alban. They moved up on the hill, a more defensive location. And that was really the birth then over the next couple of thousands of years of the empire of Monte Alban, the Zapotec
Okay.
empire. So there's a sequence writ large that also had to do with agriculture and intensification of agriculture, supporting more people, settling down, a total shift from the nomadic foraging pattern. And
Yeah.
basically, you can look around the planet, and I won't go into all this detail because it would take way too long, but you can look at Kodiak Islands near Alaska. You can look at Western Alaska, where you see the first war coming in literally at year one. I just like that. You know, at year one,
Yeah.
war starts archaeologically. So this is evidence what you see. And Europe, again, Brian Ferguson wrote a detailed chapter looking at the origin of war in the Near East and in Europe, just looking at all the archaeological evidence. It's not like war was always there. No,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like things changed and war came in. So this is a very important type of evidence where you see recurrent patterns, and then this leads you, of course, to start thinking, well, what are some of the causes and underdriving social changes
Yeah.
that allowed war to originate? And it's not haphazard. It's the same general sequence of things, whether it's happening with agriculture or whether, and this is a new bit, a new, what do I say, a new element, new research in the last some years. The complex hunter-gatherers is the other path. Complexity among the hunter-gatherers is roughly equivalent to the agricultural scenario or the agricultural development of war, because it again, it entails increasing population, settling down,
Yeah.
development of social hierarchies, lack of equality, and then
Yeah.
war coming in. It looked like you had a question for me at that point.
No, I was just going to share with you that Gandhi often said that when he was told, "Oh, what are you talking about? All history is the history of war," and he said, "No, it's the problem is not that we are always at war, but that historians are only interested in war or
Yes,
dominantly
amen.
interested in war." He says nobody has kept a record of the hundreds of years in between because
Yes.
there's no action, and it's not considered a story if people are just growing food, eating it, making merry, making babies, going on with life. So nobody records that.
Yes, I definitely agree with Gandhi on that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah, and that's including prehistory, right? It's not just history, but
that's
it's
right.
it's way distant prehistory going
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
No evidence of warfare, and no reason why you would expect there to be
Yeah.
warfare. What are you going to fight over in very simple nomadic bands that
Yeah.
lack a complex social organization? You have to carry things around, so you're not going to fight over goods.
Well,
You're not fighting over territory. So, I mean, this is what archaeology shows, right? If you step back and look at what are the patterns, we were talking about the types of evidence about human nature, and
yeah.
archaeology is just one of these types of evidence. But another important one is to look at this type of social organization in which humans lived,
Yeah.
or whether you say 97% of our
Yeah.
existence on the planet or 99%, and to look at what are called sometimes immediate return economies, or more typically nomadic foraging bands or nomadic mobile. There's different names: hunter gatherers,
Yeah. Yeah.
foragers. It's, take your pick, really. But I just say this so not to confuse people too much. We're talking about bands that are small in size, move
Yeah.
around the landscape very
Yeah.
regularly. And interestingly, the group composition is always changing. And this is a
Uh,
very important point, and we'll get to that when we talk about us versus them and so forth.
yeah.
But people come to join one band, other people leave that band and join another band. So
Mm.
what actually is the composition is constantly in a state of flux
Mm.
across most of these societies. So this is the condition under which humans evolved. And my reasoning has been, starting with my first book, Human Potential for Peace, is that if you find patterns as to what nomadic foragers tend to do, Africa, the Arctic, Southeast Asia, and so forth, then you're onto something. And there's one very interesting thing that every single nomadic forager culture I've ever read about does. They share meat. They share
Mm.
meat, and they have all sorts of rules and procedures and regulations as to how it gets shared and distributed and redistributed, but nobody goes hungry. And this has been, I think, it's showing us, for one thing, that sharing is very important for humans, and it's not just
Yeah.
meat, but it's cooperating, teamwork, and sharing. So here we come back to this.
But Doug, would it be fair to say that in that situation, the meat is not yet a commodity? It's
Well, I'm not an economist, so what do you mean by commodity exactly? I
because
mean,
it's not saleable, right? There's no concept of selling it.
no, not at all. Not at
Yeah.
all. Yes, in that sense. See, the way I like to look at it, I think I wrote this in my very first paper way back a long time ago. There weren't any refrigerators in the Kalahari Desert. So it's like you've got
Yeah.
a wildebeest. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to
Yeah.
just hoard it and let
Yeah.
the thing rot.
Yeah.
It's like we'll share now what we have, and then in the future you'll share. And with the development of sociobiology and evolutionary psychology, this whole idea of reciprocal altruism,
That's right.
I'll
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
you today and you help me tomorrow, it makes a lot of sense. And in fact,
Also,
this is what nomadic foragers have been doing for millennia, I
that's
would
right.
argue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
the
yeah.
gift idea survived. I would,
Yes.
if you see, there's so much literature now on gift economies,
Hmm.
um, and the gift as not in the current sense of Christmas present, but in this sense that you just described.
There's an underlying principle here. Let's talk about this for a minute, because it's fresh in my mind. I just finished writing last summer a short book on conflict resolution,
Hmm.
and it's going to be published in March. So
Oh.
chapter two in that book is called reciprocity, and chapter three is called relationships, and they're
Mm.
interconnected, of course. And
Mm.
with the reciprocity principle and how it relates to conflict resolution, and more generally, I do you a favor, and you feel indebted to me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and at some point you'll pay me back.
Yeah.
And in terms of conflict resolution, this is very important to keep in mind, that in the society, whether it's within a family society, a family group, or more generally the community, or more generally international relationships, this principle of positive reciprocity is just pervasive. It's a
Mm.
human trait. It's everywhere. And in fact, there's some indications that some of the our mammalian cousins also understand the reciprocity of give and take. So it's a
Yeah.
basic fundamental. Now, then there's the other side of it, which I won't go into too much, but that's the negative. If I do you bad, you're going to feel resentment and likely get back at
Yeah.
me. So when you
Yeah.
mentioned in the story holding a grudge, I thought, aha, there we
Yeah.
go. There's
Yeah.
there's the negative reciprocity, and look how this turned to hell for the people in this story. So um, these are very important when you think about human nature.
Yeah.
No society could in any way exist if there was more negative reciprocity than positive reciprocity. And if you start looking at the anthropological ethnographies or the sociology, or you just look around you in your own relationships and do
Yeah.
that type of reflective insight, you want to be on good terms with as many people as you can,
Yeah.
as much of the time as you possibly can. And this then leads to other psychological issues like why does it feel so bad when we're in a conflict with someone?
Yeah.
Makes us feel uneasy. Well,
Yeah.
bad things could happen. We might lose that relationship. We might be physically harmed. We might
Yeah.
lose property. Just downward spiral. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, like
Yeah.
I said, it's sort of fresh in my head to think about conflict resolution this way and how to keep things positive is what I'm writing in that book.
And I think one of your key insights, many insights, but the one that really jumped up at me, I think it's from your recent book with Eisler, 2019,
During our
that
humanity.
yeah, that
Here
it's
somewhere.
not fair when the counter view is that, oh well, foragers lived like this. What do you want to do with us today? You're saying something very important, that there are, of course, nobody is going back. It's never possible to go back in time. Not that we want to go back in time, but there are indeed certain essential principles or learnings that are applicable today. So, what are some of these?
So and just for your viewers, if they want to check into
Yes,
this is the book that you were just referring to,
that's
Nurturing Our
right.
Humanity.
That's right.
And it was a great honor to work with Leanne Eisler on this one.
Yeah.
This is from 2019, and again, it's Oxford University Press, and it's
Thank
out
you.
in audiobook also, which is nice. It's been out in audiobook for a few years.
Okay.
So yeah, the basic principles. I mean, the reason this is important, I think, is because if you look across cultures and you look especially across these nomadic forager cultures and you see recurring patterns, and some of the ethnographies are really deep in terms of giving you portraits as to why these people are behaving in the ways they behave. And in others, much less so, unfortunately. So it's a real mixed bag of the quality and the depth of the psychological slash social pictures that you're getting.
Hmm.
But given these caveats, the difficulties of the methodology, if you're reading a great number of them, as I obviously have, you start to see the patterns emerging. And another pattern that emerges, well, let's just talk about aggression and war here again, because these are like key ideas that you're interested in and your viewers are interested in. So the overall pattern, if you look ethnographically at the relatively recent descriptions of nomadic foragers, you don't see much war. In talking about group on group conflict, more than one person fighting more than one person, it's just really not that common. It's pretty rare, in fact. And what you see a bit more of is maybe some feuding back and forth, but most of the disputes are very personal.
Hmm.
They're the same old scenario over and over again. Man is with woman, woman winks at another man, they run off together. Husband's infuriated. He grabs two cousins and they go off to try to get his wife back. There's a fight and somebody gets killed. The husband, the lover, one of the cousins, variations, but it's on a theme. And the key point is this is not warfare. It's
No.
it's hardly ever warfare when you're talking about the
Yeah.
type of society we all lived in for millions of years. The disputes were personal. Another one is the grudge, the insult, just sort of the random thing that ticks somebody off. So you get that type of scenario. Again, it's very personal. And then another one is the revenge motive. So here we come
Hmm.
back with the negative reciprocity.
Hmm.
Um, there's a man and another man, they get into a fight, and one of them's killed. The family of the victim, and it's important, it's not anybody in the society, it's the family of the victim feels wronged and may try to kill the killer. And the killer knows this. So more
Hmm.
often than not, he hightails it, right? I'm out of
Hmm.
here. Maybe
Hmm.
I won't show my face for a year or two and hope their emotions have cooled down. And
Hmm.
sometimes they do kill him. And that's the end of the story because
Yeah.
one life has balanced another life. And
Yeah.
there again is the reciprocity principle in action.
Hmm.
So the key elements here is if you're looking to human psychology, you can find this strong emphasis on caring, cooperation, sharing, meat
Yeah.
sharing again,
Yeah.
cooperation on the hunt, cooperation with child rearing. People have looked, anthropologists have looked at how children are raised in these societies. It's certainly not the nuclear family that is so typical in the West these days. No, it's the whole band looks after the kids
Hmm.
in sequence, and fathers play a lot with toddlers of their own and whatever. So it's there are these patterns that emerge that
Yeah.
paint a picture of human nature if you step back and look at them. And
Yeah.
it's an imperfect picture in many ways. And we don't have a time machine to go back to the past. But the
No.
idea is to use what we call ethnographic analogy. And where this goes into a big debate and is a bit wonky, I must say. This I'm not proud of anthropological methods in, in all cases because some of them are pretty poor, honestly. So I try in my research to either use systematic sampling of the ethnographies and the best sources available, show my methods, and do it as scientifically as I can. That's
Mm.
one route. And I've also looked for these patterns, described what the patterns are, and given examples of them. Now, where things can go awry is when you have somebody who's being, I would say, less scientific, and they want to make this point, and they look out there and they cherry pick. Oh, here's a case I can use, and here's a case. And by the way, this is not actually a hunter-gatherer group, but I'll pull them in there because they make my case. And so I've been in, my writings rather critical of some of these methodologies, which I frankly find pretty sloppy and inappropriate. So I just wanted to slip that in there
No, no,
because I get asked these type of questions, not very often, but sometimes, and they're legitimate
sure,
questions to
sure,
ask.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So there's various types of evidence that show different human capacities. Just real quick, the
Yeah.
existence of peaceful societies, the existence of clusters of non-warring societies, peace
Mm.
systems, I call them, that are right next to each other and have not made war for a long time.
Mm.
That's another area that indicates that warfare is not always present. It's not part of human nature per se. It is something that we develop socially. We learn as you say it. It can be part of a culture, could be part of the ecological environment, part of the social organization is a big point. So if we talk about archaeology, we talk about the nomadic forager studies and the ethnographic analogy, we look and we see there are societies that just are very nonviolent, do
Mm.
not make war, murder rates are so low to be basically non-existent, et cetera, et cetera. Peace systems, clusters of neighboring societies at different levels of social organization that don't make war with each other. And we can even, and I'll just drop this one out there, we can come back to it or not, looking at the overall mammalian pattern of restrained aggression. As here enters something much bigger than humanity. If
Yeah.
you look across mammals, mammals tend to not kill other members of their own species. And there's a little caveat about infanticide in some cases is something special. But when we're talking about something that would be roughly analogous to war or analogous to physical aggression, lethal aggression, there was a very interesting and a very complicated study in terms of hours put into it, done by Spanish researchers. And this was published Gomez et al. in 2016.
Hmm.
And what they determined in looking at over 1,000 species of mammals is that many of the species, there's no record of any intra-specific killing within the species at all. And if you look for that whole 1,000, the rate of the killing is about 1/3 of 1% of an
Mm.
animal in that
Mm.
species would die at the hands of, or the claw of, or the horns of another mammal
Yeah.
of their own species. And then primates, for different reasons, tend to be a little bit higher at about 2% of the deaths and 50 for the typical primate species. And humans, of course, are primates. We're a member of that
Mm.
order. So what they do next, the Spanish researchers, is say, well, if humans were just another primate species, which we are, what is the rate of killing we would expect because they're primates? And the answer is 2%. So they looked at historical, archaeological, current day data and determined that humans are not statistically different from the expected 2% killing. And this 1 in 50 deaths at the hand of another human rate is rather low. But on the other hand, you could argue, well, 1 in 50, that's sort of high. But the important thing here is that it's predictable, and this includes deaths by war or deaths
Mm.
by individual murder or homicide, accidents. The whole infanticide even is
Mm.
included in their count.
Mm.
So humans are not. We can go back to the killer ape idea. Humans about 2%. That's pretty low for a killer ape.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing I mentioned here as sort of an aside, some notable folks like Steven Pinker and his Better Angels of Our Neighbor of Our Nature gives a much higher estimated rate, which is just so much higher it's ridiculous. And an archaeologist, I think now retired, Stephen LeBlanc, actually mentions rates of killing up to 25%. I don't know where in the world he got that idea. It seems he just sort of pulled it out of nowhere, as far as I can tell. That would be killing one person in four.
We wouldn't
You
have
know,
made it.
we wouldn't have made it. Exactly. So that's the context. That's why I'm talking about this study.
Yeah, yeah,
If we're typical mammals and typical primates in
yeah,
particular, you expect some killing, but
yeah.
that is not necessarily warfare.
No, absolutely. And plus, I mean, I don't know if you would comment on this professionally as an anthropologist, but as social beings, living at whatever this stage of technology and social evolution, surely we are no longer just another primate species.
Well, we're special, not
I
necessarily
mean,
in a good way.
in whatever that may
Yeah,
be.
yeah,
So again, to go back to Gandhi, he is also, at some point mocked by someone who says, "Mr. Gandhi, you don't understand. This has never happened in history before." And Gandhi replies, "Maybe, but I'm not interested in reading history. I'm interested in changing it."
great response. Great response.
We may have lived like that. We don't see. And the thing is that when it comes to mechanical, material behavior, there is absolutely no question that change is good, no matter what the change is.
Yes.
But why is there so little faith? Currently, at least, I'm picking up so many signals that there is very little faith in our continuing evolution in a positive sense as a species. And especially at the moment, I'm feeling
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
inundated by
yeah.
dystopic science fiction also. So,
Yes, exactly.
as somebody who cares deeply for these issues, how do you journey with that?
Well, first of all, I share your dismay on this topic. I share your observations and your dismay. And I've spent as an anthropologist and recently teaching within a peace and conflict studies department program at University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I'm often talking and lecturing, discussing, talking, whatever you want to call it, in the classroom, discussing these types of situations. And it is there's a dearth, really. You talked about the science fiction that's dystopic. Where are the utopic stories? Um, and people tend to sometimes they poo-poo utopia. Well, I could never have, no, but actually, this is a way to explore visions and possibilities,
Yeah.
options for the future. And one thing, and I want to talk about my wife here too, because she's an important contributor to most of this research. Genevieve Suyak is a philosopher,
Okay.
and obviously I'm an anthropologist. So we have different perspectives, but we've both taught in peace and conflict studies for quite a while. And in her case, from a philosophical point of view and international relations point of view, in my case, more of the anthropological view. But why am I saying this? Um, we have been working in the last decade or so
Mm.
on this concept of peace systems, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we're doing this is we're trying to present an alternative scenario that is actually based on facts,
Yeah.
actually based on examples. So we think and we hope it undermines some of the poo-pooing, oh, this could never happen, when you say, well, look, here it is in peninsular Malaysia. They've been living non-violently together for who knows how long, and they've not been engaging in war.
Yeah.
And the individual societies, all a cluster of neighboring societies, just are extremely peaceful.
Yeah.
Well, there's one example of a peace system and a set of nonviolent societies. And then we can go to Brazil and we can find tribal societies. These groups, about 10 of them, are members of 4 different language groups, and they have a larger sense of what is a community. They
Hmm.
all belong to this. They meet regularly for ceremonies, which they all participate in. When they initiate a new chief or a set of new chiefs for different villages, all of these villages participate in those ceremonies and so forth. And so they're not making war with each other. Again, a peace
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to make a big joke. Okay, you have a question or?
Yeah, no, Doug, I just want to understand that are these like communities in concentric circles? That's the image I'm getting. That so there's
Uh,
a kind of an overlapping us and them.
I like to say that it's expanding the us to include the them,
Ah,
but then that starts from the idea that there would be a them to begin with, right?
oh,
So
okay.
so yes and no. It's going to depend a little bit on the group in question about the us and them aspect of it. And
Mm-hmm.
in some of our cases, I just gave you two ethnographic examples
Hmm.
from Brazil and from Malaysia. But some of our other examples, for instance, are the historical nation of Switzerland,
Hmm.
because there were all these Swiss cantons, individual units, and there were wars among them over some 1,000-year period, on and
Yeah.
off, different ones warring with each
Yeah.
other. And so in
Yeah.
1848, after various attempts at building towards this, they implemented the Constitution, which created, and the terminology is interesting too, the Swiss Confederation. So we just refer to this country haphazardly, right? Not haphazardly, but off the cuff, as Switzerland. But technically, it's the Confederation, referring back to this long history of having
Yeah.
independent cantons. So the
Yeah.
idea now that, of course, that some canton would attack another canton within Switzerland is absurd.
Yeah.
And I can point out, there were differences here. There's language differences in this country, four main language groups in within Switzerland today. And historically, there were Protestants and Catholic cantons historically, and that
Mm.
led to much of the trouble, actually,
Yeah.
religious motivated, or at least drawing upon the religious distinction of the
Yeah.
us and the them to have these wars. So I guess my caution is, and sorry if I'm too technical, you want to be
No.
careful looking at each case before you say too much about us and them. I
Right.
think the us and the them did apply certainly to the Switzerland case.
Hmm.
I'm not so sure it applies to the Brazilian Upper Xingu case
Hmm.
so well. In that situation, they are all neighbors. They have a similar subsistence base. They speak very different languages. Like I say, four different language groups, but that doesn't keep them from interacting.
Of
And
course.
so, yeah, but making the big jump, I mean, we can jump up either to the Nordic countries, the five Nordic countries
Yeah.
that have not made war with each other for over 200 years. And this sort of evolved from a situation where Denmark and Sweden engaged in wars in particular.
Yeah.
Finland for a long time was sort of, well, it's Grand Duchy for a while of Russia, but
Hmm.
for 600 some years, it was a territory of Sweden. Hence, there are Swedish-speaking Finns to this day living in Finland. Interesting history. They're all neighbors. There's a lot of commonality, but there are some diversity differences here. But they gave up war over a series of events. And they even talk about when Norway was given its independence from Sweden, that it was called the First Nordic Non-War, because there were troops lined up in Norway and troops lined up in Sweden at the border, and it was touch and go there. Are they going to have a war over whether Norway becomes independent or not? But
Yeah.
there was a big peace movement. There was some grander thinking, and there was some concept there in this case, again, us
Yeah.
versus them. Well, interesting identity, because there was some real push in Sweden. They're our brothers. We can't fight Norwegian brothers. Their languages are similar. They had been part of the country. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
again, the us them question is tricky, more tricky than
Yes, it is.
often portrayed.
And very
But
fluid, very fluid.
yeah,
It is.
EU, another incredible example.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
these are
Though,
all peace systems, and maybe I should just make a comment again to emphasize the main point of what I'm trying to get here.
yeah.
You started with a question about the lack of positive scenarios.
Mm.
And one of my answers to that one is to look at these peace systems as we've done, and there's others out there to be looked at, right? But to understand that it's true that people go to war, but it's also true that peoples make peace. And in
Yeah.
some case, they make a very strong, lasting, durable peace.
Yeah.
And that's what humans do also.
Yeah.
And in a way, we've been sold, all of us, we've been sold a bill of goods as you were saying earlier, war, it's a history of war. Gandhi pointed out one war after the other, ignoring the. So I would say the same thing about peace systems. Nobody's out there looking for clusters of neighboring societies that have not made war with each other for a
Yeah.
long time. I
Yeah.
mean, there are a few of us, right? But most people aren't.
Yeah.
Most people, this is a brand new concept. Um, and I'll mention for your our listeners, I guess, um, Genevieve and I did a film a couple of years ago called A Path Away from War,
Hmm.
Science of Peace Systems.
Okay.
So,
So that's great.
it-
I can, if you send me the link, I
yes.
I'll include that in the when I post the video in the introductory passage, so it'll be easier for people to find it.
Well, that'd be fantastic. Yes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's it's long enough to tell you something, but short enough that we don't lose anybody. It's only 9 minutes long or
No,
so.
no, that'll be very
And
wonderful. I'll also
yeah,
enjoy watching it. Yeah.
okay,
Um,
great.
so in
So
closing,
that's one
no, go
answer
ahead.
to your question
Yeah.
of
No, it's a
hope,
very
right?
powerful answer.
And another one is to really emphasize the importance of vision.
Yeah.
Gandhi certainly had the big picture. He had the
Yeah.
vision.
Yeah.
He didn't accept how things were. He wanted to, as you say, I'll paraphrase it, right? Create something new, change the course of history. So this is
Absolutely.
also one of the key elements that I'd like to emphasize, that peace leadership, I don't think gets anywhere near the attention that it should. Gandhi is a perfect example, world renowned now, world famous for what he managed to accomplish. And of course, he worked with a whole lot of other people. But
Yeah.
fundamentally, he was an absolute inspiring leader of nonviolence and independence for India. And you're the expert on him. You know better than I do what I'm saying. But I'll also just include, for instance, from our research, Jean Monnet and the European Union is a
Yes.
fascinating
Yes.
individual. Again, explicit vision and goal to have an integrated Europe to prevent future wars on the continent of Europe
Yeah.
and promote prosperity. I call them the two P's, peace and prosperity. And he was able to influence people. He talked to everybody. And one of the aphorisms that he liked was never underestimate the importance of saying your simple message over and over and over. So that's what he
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And it
absolutely.
worked. It did
Yeah.
work. Absolutely. So, in closing, what is the advice you would give to young people? Because, of course, this is all extremely helpful. And so I'm so glad that, your ideas will now be available to our audiences. But on the whole, young people tend to now be tilting a bit on the side of despair.
Yeah.
And um, because the situations where violence is winning are so acutely painful and they seem so unsolvable. I mean, most notably, just now, Israel and Palestine, um,
Yes.
that it's so undermining of morale. So, what are some of the ways in which people can hang in there and keep the resolve to defy this pessimism uh, uh, going?
We're a social species. That's clear to me as an anthropologist. So find other like-minded people
Hmm.
and associate with them and give each other support and strength, just like we naturally do as a community.
Yeah,
It may be a small group working on a particular topic that's important to you, but join that group and
yeah,
do it with others. That's
yeah,
very important. They need your support and you need their support. It's teamwork. It's the sharing meat in a making the society better type of way. So I
yeah.
think that's very important. And then I would say again, let me quote Monet because another one of his points was don't ask me if we have a chance of succeeding. I don't care about that. I just have to do it. So I think that's another. I seem to get a disturbance when I said that.
Yeah, no, there's something in
Visual.
the network, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we got rid of that disturbance. A la Monet, don't underestimate your ability to make a change, and you won't know if you're going to succeed or not until you try. And all the time, there are groups of different sizes and individuals of different sizes. Individuals of different sizes. That's not exactly what I meant to say. People making a difference, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. But if you try something and it doesn't work, try something else.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
successes. From my own life, for instance, along with many thousands of other people, when I was living in the American Southwest, there were multiple protest demonstrations and civil disobedience at the Nevada nuclear test site during the 1980s.
Yeah.
And this was supported by some Congress people. It was supported
Yeah.
by noted scientists like Carl Sagan. It was supported by various Hollywood folks, gained publicity, but many just people who felt strong about this issue. And it was a very moving experience to go to that test site, which I did one time from Tucson, Arizona. I didn't engage in civil disobedience because I didn't feel that's what I wanted to do, but I was part of there and wrote about my experiences subsequently. So that sort of reinforces the first part about do something with a group. That was
Yeah.
emotionally and psychologically uplifting and powerful.
Yeah.
But in this case, it also reinforces the second point that sometimes you can actually succeed
Yeah.
because we did manage to stop nuclear testing.
Yeah.
I believe the year that it went
Yeah.
into effect was 1992. So it took some concerted effort over a decade or more, but it eventually prevailed and resulted in one good step towards peace, a
Yeah.
significant, I think, in this case, step towards peace. So these types of things happen all the time. I've also been a young person, although it's been a while, and I know you have too. And I fully remember the feeling of despair and disempowerment. What can one individual do? So again, do what moves you. This is my third point. If you're a writer, write. If you're an artist, do art, social commentary. If you just feel you want to protest, well, think of creative ways to apply nonviolence.
Yeah.
There's some great resources, after Gandhi, as how to use nonviolence creatively. I used to teach a class at UNCG and prior universities on the power of nonviolence.
Hmm.
And Gene Sharp is a key
Of
name
course.
in
Of course.
developing
Yes.
tactics and strategies. Um, there's so much creativity there. One thing that amazes me is sort of a spin-off idea of what you're saying about the limitation of just the march and the protest.
Mhm.
Well, Gene Sharp lists, if I'm remembering right, 198 different things you could do,
Yeah.
including boycotts and
Put them on a
everything
chart.
else. Yeah, put them on exactly. So, I mean, there
Yeah.
again, a lot of different things. If protesting is your thing, become a sharp expert. If teaching,
Yeah.
it's not an accident that I ended up teaching power of nonviolence.
Yeah.
I thought this was important and I wanted to teach that. So I
Yeah.
happen to be a
Yeah.
teacher, so
Yeah.
I taught that.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways, right, that you can
Absolutely.
participate and do
Yes.
something
Yes.
across what we humans do. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I also I've said to my students in the past. Yeah, you're one person, but you can make a difference, and
Yeah.
collectively we add up. And so I hope that helps with some despair. I think also, I mean, I really would love for some Bollywood or Hollywood or somewhere in between to give us some more positive peace movies and entertainment that
Yeah.
really are not dystopic, but to the
Yeah.
opposite. They show, there's the old sci-fi show Star Trek from my childhood, and of course it evolved, of course, so many different versions of the thing,
No, no, but
right?
the
But the
original is
original,
still a classic. Can't
there
beat
we
it.
go, the originalist. Do you
Yeah.
remember when
Yeah.
they come back to Earth and
The movie where they have to,
Earth almost blew itself up, back in
yeah, yeah. They
history.
come back to
Yeah,
get the whales.
is that what it was? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That right, right.
They have to bring the whales, go back so that they can find whales and bring them to their time. Because only
Wow.
whales can respond to the message that the spaceship is emitting.
Interesting. I've not actually seen that one. That was one
I
of the
think
movies,
that's
I think, right?
it should be movie number 5.
Movie number five.
It's
Okay,
when they made
you're
movies.
obviously a
Oh,
Trekkie to some
I am,
degree.
I am, I am.
Yeah. Well, so many great lessons out of that
Yeah,
series or set of
yeah,
series. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. No, this is wonderful because what you're saying in essence is as long as you don't give up, you're part of the answer.
Two thumbs up.